On today's episode, we learn how the government should force companies to make us less addicted to smartphones, see that adding thousands of new IRS agents is a good thing, and if you're worried, it's because you cheat on taxes. Hear that Donald Trump is second only to Jesus dying on the cross, and find out that if you think the inflation tax on the middle class is real, you're delusional. This is Cringe Posts. Hello, friends. Welcome to this episode of the Cringe Posts podcast. This is the show where we gather the cringiest political and cultural takes that we see in our feeds, and we break them down, talk about what's cringe about them, why they went wrong, and hopefully we have fun and laugh along the way. My name is Donald, and I'm here with my co-host Britt. And before we make fun of other people's cringes, we always highlight our own bad cringes because we've all said dumb things online before. It's just part of living in the 21st century, and so we like to point that out too, because we have come a long way as well. So before we get started and to that, I just want to remind you to like and comment and subscribe. Share that with your friends if you're having a good time with us. We appreciate it. It helps us grow, and we love to see it. And then also that if you want to see these posts and you're not watching our YouTube channel, you can go to cringeposts.com and follow along there. We put the posts up so you can see them visually if you are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast listening material. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and look at this cringe post from Britt back in 2011, where Britt writes, "You're all just a bad memory." The misspelling of "your" to "you're all just a bad memory." And maybe this is just the way it's cropped, but unfortunately for Lonely Brit there, it looks like there's no no replies or interactions whatsoever. Just a
moody, bad post. Yeah, it's just I saw it and I thought, we're kind of reaching the bottom of the barrel of our cringiness, and people that are watching and listening, it's like you look at Donnie's cringe takes and they're pretty good, and then at least it's like, oh, this is a sane person with just a really bad take, and then you look at mine from 10 years ago and I'm dragging for oh my gosh, some moody teenager that can't even doesn't know the proper way to spell your. I was just, this is such an awful, ugly little thing, and I don't even know what it's about, obviously, so it wasn't that important.
Hey, well,
Other than that, it is a bad memory, so maybe I was talking to future self.
I think you're giving me too much credit when I am the only one on this so far to have a share if you agree post.
Yeah,
so,
that's pretty bad.
There was no sign of intelligent life there, but yeah, no, these vague posts are classic, and I think what I like about this one, and too, nothing deep, it's just it also, not only is it a vague emotion post that there are plenty of, but it also feels like one where you're trying to sound romantic in it. You're trying to, it's not even like I'm really sad right now, which is sort of the raw, give me pity. It's the you're all just a bad memory. Like you're wording it trying to be winsome in some way.
It's the tweet version of no regrets, but regrets is spelled bad as a tattoo. You get it on the tattoo on yourself. Ugh, it's multiple layers to it.
Well, let's move to our first external cringe post here. That if this cringe post advice was taken, we wouldn't have as many bad tweets. Now I'm going to preface this by saying I'm actually going to plug this page on Facebook because I love this page. It's actually run by people I know who I like, and I think they have, more often than not, very based, good takes. This one I thought was a bad take. I actually commented on it, and we actually kind of resolved things. But I think it's interesting to highlight regardless because it's kind of a common sentiment out there. So anyway, so the page is called "Appalling Apostolic Memes for Liberty-Minded Teens." And they post a lot of church-related content and generally Christian life stuff. But he posts, "Think I would donate literally thousands to the first politician to introduce a bill to force Google and Apple to install apps by default on all their mobile OS to encourage people to set usage limits. The tech industry and phones especially is the best example of how the free market isn't always a self-correcting thing." And then a picture of a humorous Pepe image. I think no matter what the post is, you can always expect a great image along with it from appalling apostolic memes. And so the first thing that I commented in this thread was, these features already exist by no regulation of the government. And it was funny because they came back and said, okay, and I mentioned it. I said, I'm pretty sure it's in iOS, and I know it's in, I think, most Android phones now. I know it was introduced, at least as far as I'm aware, in the software version of Android called Oxygen OS that OnePlus uses. That's the phone I run. So I knew they introduced this thing called Zen mode, which is you basically turn it on you can set it in increments of like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour and a half, and it will block out everything. So you can't get in. You could only make a 911 emergency call, and notifications are all blocked just so that you can disconnect. There are also ways to monitor how much time you spend and give you reminders to say, hey, don't do this. Also ways to lock out, all these features. Anyway, so he comes back and, oh, show me where it is on Android. And someone else came in and said, yeah, no, as of Android 12, the latest update, it's built into literally every single phone running Android as well. And if it wasn't, it will. You know what I'm saying? Like, exactly. And so it's one of those things where the emphasis of it, I don't disagree with. I think people are terminally online, and I think that disconnecting from your tech is great. But these features, you don't need to donate to a politician to force companies to do this. They've already introduced it because the demand is there. Yeah, it kind of reminded me of, I can't remember what year this, I think it was like 2014, but when Apple paid U2 $100 million and automatically downloaded U2's newest album onto everyone's phone. And normally, it's not a bad album by any means, but because it was, forced on people without them like actually spending the money to buy it. This was before like Spotify had really taken off, so you still bought stuff on iTunes. The backlash against this album, because of like it was hoisted onto people, was intense, and it's kind of like an album that YouTube would like to forget, even though it's got some songs that I really, really dig. And so you think about, it's like what prices do, and what prices do, and what making someone pay for something does is it says, hey, someone is more likely to use this thing and appreciate it and actually extract the value out of it because they have given something for it, right? And like you were saying, of course, there are all these apps and built-in features in iOS, and I'm not on Android. But on all these operating systems that already like monitor your time, and you can kind of like set reminders to, hey, get off the phone or whatever and all that. And literally lock you out as well. And lock you out. To be clear. Yeah. Yeah. But like those kind of go ignored. And so there's still a marketplace for apps that you pay for, because there are people that care enough about getting off their phones to actually go pay for them and to use them. And so what would happen if you introduced a bill that forced this, even though let's just say it wasn't being done already, by these companies, and the only things that existed were paid apps. These companies would do it, and the people that use them today would probably go buy a version themselves, or maybe they would use the free version, and the people that were never going to use it would be like, oh, great, this is just a big old hamper on my ability to, live and use my device, and they would still find workarounds to do it. The thing about the free market is that it's lock in step with human nature, and this is kind of a point to a lot of, the more libertine folks. It's like, well, you can't truly have liberty unless you are also moving towards a more moral, just, honorable society. There's definitely an aspect of that. So that's exactly it. And I think that the person who posted this is what you might call a post-libertarian. They were very libertarian, and now they're in that sort of post-libertarian phase where they're sympathetic in a lot of ways. And I wouldn't put this person as like an antithesis to someone, but very critical of the liberty movement broadly speaking. But to me, I think that this is a misunderstanding of the liberty position and what sort of place it should be held. Where his line, the free market isn't always a self-correcting thing. Well, I don't think I'm trying to make the argument that the free market makes you a more moral person. What I'm arguing is that the free market is the most moral way to exchange things, and exchange of power, exchange of production. These things are going to happen, and allowing a free market lets that happen in the most moral way. Now, like you said, I think that comes with the stipulation that you need to be, as a culture in particular, and as individuals, you need to be moving towards a more moral ground. You need to work on your own ethic, your own discipline, and all these sorts of things. But we're not arguing the free market makes you a more moral person. We're arguing that the government will not make you a more moral person either. And so this post makes the assumption that should you donate to this politician to require this of Google and Apple, this will suddenly have the intended outcome to make people more moral. But like you pointed out, even, I mean, heck, whether or not you pay for it, implementing that feature doesn't mean people are going to use it. They have to have that drive in and of themselves. And so it's like, when I say, having a government regulation enforce that won't make someone more moral, it seems like this post is trying to say, yeah, well, the free market doesn't make you more moral either. And to that I say, yeah, correct. We want to encourage people to be free, though, and to make those moral decisions and to have a culture of free market exchange so that you're able to be more moral. Because what happens is when you have government regulations that are dictating morality, you actually get locked out of being able to freely express your own morality and move towards those things, because ultimately the people in power don't want a more moral society. They always corrupt and always go towards what they view as, morality, which ends up being things like critical race theory and social Marxism. So, it seems like I'm not trying to argue the free market makes you more moral, but that's sort of the straw man argument that's being beaten up here. And the funny thing is, in this straw man argument that's being made, the example still already exists, where it's like, even if I was trying to argue that the free market makes you more moral, I would have a more sound case because the free market already provided these services that he was wanting the government to force onto you.
Yeah, and I think the crux of the argument lies in that the only society that will result in morality is a society that does allow free exchange and for you to actually choose to be moral. If you're forced to be moral, you're not actually, a good person. If someone's holding a gun to your head and says, "Hey, you got to do this or got to do that," like maybe there's a chance like you would do that without that gun to your head, but you would never actually know, right? And a significant portion of the population doesn't actually know if they would or would not. So the only way to know and the only way to actually have morality or good things happen is when people freely choose them or freely choose to, purchase them. And like you're saying, a lot of solutions for this already exist. I was just talking with a friend on Saturday about this, where it's like, hey, you can go buy a dumb phone. Like the market has provided a dumb phone that doesn't allow you to get on, Google Chrome or doesn't allow Instagram, but it still has the features that are useful in a smartphone, navigation, and you can text pretty easily and stuff like that. And it's not it's super expensive. I mean, it's probably the fifth of a price of an iPhone, right? And so, like, that exists already. And if you mandated that everyone had to get these phones, what would happen is someone would just get a tablet and carry it alongside their their phone. The people that don't want to actually change, and then the people that do want to change would have already purchased that phone in the first place and would already be making progress towards this. The last thing I want to say about this too is, a lot of people talk about liberty. And they see a problem today, and they assume because it's not solved right away, right immediately, that the free market isn't working. It's like, well, things take time to change. Like culture takes time. It takes years, decades sometimes for things to change. So just because you don't see an answer that happens with a snap of a finger doesn't mean that something's not working. If you really want to look at the span of time about something not working, think about government for the past thousands of years trying to mandate behavior, and for some reason it's still not working. And the only modems of interaction that are just in society are the ones that are voluntary and that respect not aggressing on another person. So that's the best. I mean, you look at the United States, the most free society also became the most prosperous within about 150 years by upholding those values. And no, it's not been perfect or anything like that. No one, that doesn't really need to be said. But the principle of that remains. And it's like, well, I mean, 150 years is a relatively short amount of time. But if you're measuring, the results of the free market hasn't corrected this cell phone thing, and smartphones have been around, for more or less a decade, it's like, well, maybe you should think a little bit more about, the span of time and how you relate to it. It's kind of like that post before. It's like if we did a few weeks ago, oh, well, it doesn't, the functionality of it doesn't meet my needs right now, so it must be useless to everyone. It's like, well, the timeline doesn't fit, I don't know how old this person is. I'm assuming they're around our age, but it's like, oh, well, it hasn't happened in my lifetime, which is 30 years old, so the market has failed. It's like, no, that's not it. That's not a real timeline. Like, tell me in like 70 years, right, after we've had these phones for that long, and that, and maybe people don't choose to get better, right? That's always an option, but they're never going to get better unless they actually choose it themselves, regardless of government intervention.
Yeah, when you talk about that aspect in particular, I think of, I try to self-regulate, gaming or whatever, how much I game, and I don't think I've ever regulated from the time when like those Nintendo pop-ups, like, hey, you've been playing a long time, maybe take a break. I don't think that's ever motivated me to do it. It's always like, get out of the way. That's so annoying, and it's always
now I got to play 10 more minutes for that 30 seconds that I had to unlock it.
Yeah, exactly. See, it's like that never, and maybe that helps some people, but really the drive has to be there already. You have to find the internal motivation, which I don't think is provided by the free market necessarily, though the free market provides ways for you to help yourself get that self-discipline. But the free market certainly doesn't spoil that either, which I think in many cases the government will. Okay, moving to our next post. I think a lot of you are going to be shocked that we are featuring this person on the show. It is, in fact, Robert Reich, yet again. I know. I could hardly believe that Robert Reich had a terrible take. And he tweets, beefing up IRS enforcement is good, actually. Collecting all unpaid federal income taxes from the richest 1% would generate an estimated, and I'm trying to think, that's what, 1,000 million, billion, trillion. 1,750 billion over a decade. And this, of course, is in response to the recently passed Inflation Reduction Act, which, if you are savvy, you know that you should basically take any bill's name and conclude it will do the opposite. So we're in for extra levels of inflation here, thanks to this stupid bill that I believe it nearly doubles, if not doubles, or more than doubles, the number of IRS agents.
87,000.
Yeah, something just absolute insane numbers. And I think a lot of people are rightfully complaining that that's horrible and will have terrible effects and is a waste of money, for one thing, as well as empowering one of the single worst arms of the government domestically. And so, of course, Robert Reich has to take the worst possible position imaginable, saying that it's a good thing. And I think what's frustrating about this is he makes this sort of conjecture that hiring more IRS agents just equals collecting what all the unpaid federal income taxes are going to be. Like, that's just a magical, all you have to do is hire these people. And
more
it's like,
good.
Yeah. It's like, well, one, hiring more means that you're wasting more of that money too, like in terms of bureaucratic nonsense and how much waste there is in government. And two, you have no guarantees that, those taxes, which are quote unquote owed, which you and I would contest anyway, but these owed taxes are going to get collected. Usually the reason why the richest don't pay those taxes is, one, because they find loopholes that more IRS agents aren't going to be able to fix. You have to fix through actual policy, amendations and things like that. Or two, it's because they're specifically, and usually it's hand in hand with the loophole thing, but they're buying off Congress and lobbyists and the federal government. So why would empowering the federal government help to cure the problem that is caused by the federal government? It doesn't make any sense, and that's just surface level analysis.
Yeah, the thing that got me about this on my first read was the words he used, like, it would generate an estimated 1.75 trillion, over a decade. It's like, it's not generating, like, you're taking that from people and then reallocating it other places. Like, the government doesn't generate anything. I mean, maybe it's the same as like if a mafia goes, out and does a shakedown and gets back and says, "Hey, look what we generated." But they would never say that. They say, "Look what we took." That's what they would say. Look what we took. Look at what we got from all these people. That's what it is. So don't confuse. Oh, you hire these 87,000 IRS agents. It's like, I can't remember. I think it's like Google right? Like Google, one of the most like impactful companies out there, I think has like 100,000 employees. So they basically have more, if they're doubling their employment staff, they're like, well, we need to have twice as many people as Google to collect all your money and take it from you. It's like, oh my gosh, like, and these people aren't generating anything. They're just taking it. And I think I read somewhere too that they're also buying, like, they bought $1 million worth of ammunition. They're arming their people with, I think they bought like 4,500 guns and stuff like that. It's just wild, man. They have their own SWAT team for collecting taxes. The other side of it too is like, this guy is so dishonest because he says, oh, well, it's just for the richest 1%. And it's like, well, basically all audits happen to people that are not in the 1%. And this is further bolstered by the fact that the Republicans introduced an amendment to this Inflation Reduction Act, which was basically like, hey, like, you say that it's going to only, audit the richest 1% of people in the country. So let's do that. Like, all new IRS hires, all 87,000 of them, they can't audit anyone that makes below $400,000 a year. And, totally unaware of how this would look, the Democrats said, no, we don't want to pass that amendment. So you're talking about both sides of the mouth. And so what you realize is like, oh, these are the goons of the state coming to take your money. They want to collect as much as they can. They want to make it as painful for you as possible, for you to live your life and to just go about, no one likes taxes, man. Like, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, you're left or right, male or female. No one likes taxes. Everyone gets grumpy when you got to open up QuickBooks or whatever, TurboTax or whatever, and fill out the hours upon hours of forms. It's like, let's have more of that. That's what the government says. And I think everyone should view the IRS. I think everyone should view the government through the lens of like, well, they gave us the IRS. And so whoever gave us the IRS, we probably shouldn't like them because it's just a... And Robert Reich, he never saw a tax he didn't love.
Well, and the thing that's frustrating to me too is that Robert Reich is no centrist or anything, but there is this sort of enlightened centrist idea where they're like, well, no, this could be a good idea because we want to crack down and make sure that people are paying their fair share of taxes. And I don't like audits, but really hiring this to support a government agency that's overwhelmed and needs it is it's kind of that perspective, one of these justifications for this mass increase. And it's like, look, if we're talking about the vast amount of spending and personnel hiring that this causes, why would we not go in the other direction? And rather than spending money on more IRS agents to try to, enforce this needlessly complicated tax code, what if we hired 87,000 tax experts to reduce and simplify the tax code so that there aren't these loopholes for this 1% to generate or whatever, to get out of all these taxes, to make it so that it's not this hassle for Americans to have to figure out where they're filing and what make it a simple, if you hire 87 experts to work on this problem, it'd be a temporary job because it's a one-time thing, so you're not keeping them on in perpetuity, and you're eliminating so much of the needless complexity that, one, lets people get away with tax fraud if that's what they're worried about, and two, makes it so that these audits wouldn't be happening to people who are genuinely confused because the tax code is so if the people actually cared about making taxes quote unquote fair, they would be working on a system that doesn't just hire to kind of like it's like building a boat too big that there are holes in it, and rather than redesigning the boat to be more fit to your need, trying to patch all the different holes and hiring 20 different people to patch those holes, and then the boat's heavier and sinks down more, It's like, if they really cared, they would worry about making the tax code actually fit, the understanding of the average American so they're not getting screwed over by it, and making it simple enough that there aren't these ridiculous quote unquote loopholes so that the rich get out of. And that's sort of the enlightened centrist view, which I don't even uphold, because I think that you should abolish it altogether. But if we're going to be spending this money and hiring 87,000 people, why are they not advocating for doing so in a reasonable way? And the answer is, like you pointed out with the guns and the ammunition, it's because they want more power. They want more government goons. They want more enforcement mechanism to be able to go in and punish people who are dissenters.
Well, you just think about the amount of resources that go to complying with taxes between, the fact that there are billion-dollar companies like TurboTax and all of the other, H&R Block and all these companies out there that literally sprung up just to like help people file their taxes. And it's like, man, like billions of dollars being spent into that. Imagine it's not only the fact that that's taken away and that's money that's being spent on expense that shouldn't necessarily be there. It's also the opportunity cost of where those billions of dollars could go, right? So not only are we having to pay, I think it's like $6.5 billion a year in salaries to just hire these people. But on top of that, it's like, well, we're going to also have to pay a bunch more to these other tax companies who are also going to have to hire people and take them off the market. It's just the amount of opportunity cost that is taken away, both in personnel and in resources, is astronomical. And it's really, really unfortunate that, people don't, we just take it for that it's there. Like, oh, the IRS is there. It's just a fact of life. It's like, well, the income tax didn't really exist it didn't exist for most of America's history. It's been the minority of time that it's existed, in our country's history at least. And we kind of look at it in other societies in the past, like, wow, like, you think about Robin Hood, it's like, oh, they talk about like taxes. The bad guy is the sheriff who goes around trying to collect taxes. Yet there's this disconnect thinking that it's like, oh, well, you're a good citizen, if you pay your taxes. And, it's a sign of the public school indoctrination, right? We've developed these nice little drones that go around parroting one thing and then thinking and loving Robin Hood in another. Hopefully, as these taxes are used for worse and worse and more nefarious things, people start to be like, oh man, do I? When I fill out and I see that little line on my check that I get from my company and, 20%, 15% of the money that I worked for this past week is gone, like, and that went to blowing up brown people in the Middle East, or that went to, paying for Nancy Pelosi to go over to, Taiwan to almost start World War III. It's like, maybe people start to wake up and be like, maybe they are the big bad sheriff. And maybe it's every single politician out there is the big bad sheriff, not whether they're Republican or Democrat.
Totally agree. The last thing I'll say is I was fortunate to have a very financially savvy upbringing, in the sense my mom is a CPA and my dad is a CFP. So they knew about all this stuff. And so when I got my first paycheck, I was disgruntled, but I wasn't like shocked when taxes were taken out, right? But the thing that I think shocked me was filing taxes, because the sort of simple illustrations that people always joke about, sort of that boomer, like conservative joke about you get your kid ice cream and you're like, oh, I'm teaching him about taxes because I'm taking the scoop out of his, ice cream and eating it myself. And that's the dad tax, and teaching him about taxes. That's kind of the rudimentary understanding of taxes. And that's wholly inadequate. It's like, if you were to take that to the logical extreme to actually prepare a kid, because where I was taking it back, it's like, okay, so not only is it like, oh, as your dad, I'm taking a spoonful of your ice cream as a tax. Now, you, as my child, are responsible to know how many ounces of ice cream you had in that scoop, okay? I've taken out approximately one spoonful, but you need to make sure that if you measure it correctly, that's actually the spoonful I got is proportionally one spoonful to your ice cream. And if you got more ice cream, then you have to actually scoop it out and give it to me. Now, since I have more than one kid, I actually am going to need to take more of your ice cream to pay for other people to make sure that to go and check on you, to make sure that you reported correctly the amount of ice cream that you acquired that you need to give to me. It's like, that's the level of tax. It's not just this one-time easy out of your check payment. That happens every month, every pay period you have that happen. And then you also, for some reason, it's your responsibility to keep track of how much extra you owe to these goons. And then if you don't, they send people out after you with, guess what? The taxpayer money that you've already paid and will owe and continue to owe. It's an insane system. And anyone who's supporting just adding in all of these, extra IRS agents, and again, the purported good being more tax money is collected, just insane, just insanity. I don't care if you're the richest person in the world or the poorest person in the world. The idea that more taxes being taken out is a good thing is just not, it's just wild. It's just crazy. It's just goofy. Okay, moving to our next post. This one comes from Nick Adams, who is verified. I'm not quite sure who he is, but he has quite the take here, which is to say...
He's not joking either. He's not joking.
Yeah. He tweets, outside of Jesus dying for our sins, I'm sorry, just break here. That's a really good way to start a tweet. Outside of Jesus dying for our sins, the stakes are very high. Okay. Outside of Jesus dying for our sins, Donald J. Trump is the single greatest gift to all citizens of the world. That sounds like a tweet Trump would tweet. That's like,
well, he's self-proclaimed Trump's favorite author. That's in his bio.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah, he sounds like Trump's doctor. So if you remember, like, the healthiest patient I've ever had in the history of practice, the greatest. Like this is just an exercise in hyperbole. The single greatest gift to all citizens of the world. My goodness. Would you say that was true to the citizens of Yemen or to the citizens of Syria when he dropped the bomb there? Or would you even say that to the citizens of I don't know, the January 6th protesters who he did not mass pardon, who he's left in the lurch and who he hasn't defended, even though they're his most ardent supporters? That's kind of an interesting claim. It's kind of hard to respond to this because it's just so goofy and just not true.
Well, I think it's with our first post, talking about how you can't actually have a free society unless people actually choose to be good people. Like the government can never make us into good people. And that's where conservatives really go wrong, is they believe that, it's just the wrong people are in the reins of power, right? If we get the right people in the reins of power, then everything will be good, and magically our society will be awesome, and everything will be good and right, and justice will reign over all. And so then that line of thinking takes them to, Donald Trump is a Republican and he did really great and he sounds like a populist, so therefore he's on a moral equivalency of Jesus, in terms of the gift that he gives to the world, because whatever his will is and whatever his plan for it, is the good one, because he's got the right letter next to his name and he says the right things, no matter what he actually does, or no matter his actual personal life. It's like, I like Trump because he kind of sticks it to the establishment. I think he's probably an insanely bad person. I mean, I don't think there's anyone that would disagree with that. A lot of people, maybe this guy, I mean, he thinks that he's like Jesus apparently, but they kind of like project morality and almost like a messianic image onto political leaders. And the left does this too, right? To be fair. I mean, you only have to look at the Obama years and be like, they describe Obama as a very messianic figure. And that's what happens, right? When you've got a government saying, well, we are the source of morality. We are the way that society gets better. We have a big old button in front of us that is make the world a better place button. And if you elect me, I don't know why that guy's not pushing it. I'll push the button. And they make you believe that they have the ability to do that, but they actually don't. They are human and fallible. And in most cases, I'd say 99.9% of cases, the only people that want to be near that button are people that want to actually screw you. People that are addicted to power. I think it was J.R.R. Tolkien said that, ruling other people is the least fitting job for a person. And usually only the worst kind of people want that job. Not even saints are fit to do it. And I really do believe that. And I feel bad for this guy, man. It's like the true hope and the true ability to, make himself a better person and to actually have good, make good things happen in the world is going to be hampered by this deification of Trump. And it also it gives credence to some of these folks that don't like Trump. It's just it's more powerful the other way. But yeah, and to follow up your Tolkien quote, the flip side of it is the C.S. Lewis quote. Of course, they were good friends, so it makes sense. About how the worst kind of tyranny is the tyrant who enacts his tyranny for your own good because he believes he is doing they'll persecute us without conscience. And so it's like, on the one hand, you have only the worst kinds of people who want the power to begin with. And even the ones who want to do good usually rule tyrannically for your own good, right? And so I think that is the ultimate kind of condemnation of the point that the post-libertarians make, the populist right, the new conservatives, whatever you want to, broadly speaking, call them, the ones that make the argument that the reins of government power are going to be used by someone,
So it may as well be us to sort of push, quote unquote, the right things. And I think that that's a fatal flaw, because I think the idea that hierarchy exists is true. I think the idea that power will exist is true. I think the idea that it has to be through a government and a coercion-based system is not true. I think that you can have hierarchies, you can have authorities, you can have structures that are more of a meritocracy, right? And those kinds of things intrinsically reward people who provide value and good things. And that's why I think as a culture, you want to push for authority to be held within the church. And the church is going to be flawed just like any institution will, but you don't want it to be through a self-appointed group of people who have a quote unquote monopoly on legitimate force. That is the worst of all kinds of authorities that you can try to turn to, because then you end up, again, with people who, even in the name of doing the right thing or pushing the correct thing, will end up pushing tyranny for your own good. So it's like, oh, the reins of government are already going to exist. We got to use them to win for our team. Those people deify Trump, if that's any sort of comfort. They're deifying a man who couldn't even say 2 Corinthians correctly when he was at a Bible college. Like, if you worry that, about getting the right people in power, the ones who are telling you that you need the right people in power are the ones who are saying, oh yeah, I really support Christianity, and then are sleeping around with porn stars. Okay. So, and if they're not doing that, they're deifying the man who does that. So it's like, there's so many degrees of separation where we're all flawed people. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person, but I'm saying that the people who want to rule over you, who want to do the quote unquote right thing, because the government just needs to be in the hands of the right people, they're not good people either. And the edicts that they will use from a position of force are not going to be good, because having to enact something with force on a broad federal scale that is not localized to a family unit is just recipe for disaster. Okay, moving to our next post here. This one reads, oh man. The very same Republicans telling people that COVID is a hoax and climate change is a hoax and January 6th is a hoax are trying to tell the American people that a Biden tax increase on the middle class is real. I don't know where to begin with this one, because if you still, I'm not saying that there are no people who said that or are saying that COVID is a hoax. I think that there are people who are saying that. But that is just the easiest, there's a list of things here, but that is the easiest shorthand to dismiss any kind of valid and scientifically proven critique of the response to COVID and the lockdowns to COVID, is to say, oh, you're just a denier, or you're a COVID denier, or you believe in that it's a hoax, you're a anti-science, you're an anti-vaxxer, all this just, or like climate change is a hoax. Well, or to say, well, no, the climate's changing, but is it man-made activity? Is the response, the trade-offs worth the kind of activity? Is the change that we're doing needed to be done by government action? January 6th is a hoax. Yes, January 6th happened. Is it as big a deal as you think it is? Are the charges appropriate? Is this a complete overreach of government using its domestic spying capabilities on its own citizens? All of these legitimately nuanced, good questions get relegated to, oh, hoax. They're just denying that it exists. And that's such a low IQ way to respond to arguments that it's frustrating that that's even the premise upon which this tweet is based. And it's obviously made to directly contrast what this person thinks is a hoax, the idea that there's a tax increase on the middle class. And it's also funny because this person probably acknowledges that inflation is real. And what is inflation but a tax on people who save, who have money, and who is in the, other than the poor, who is in the most vulnerable position when it comes to holdings and assets that are going to be hurt by inflation? The middle class. So it's just an insane thing to say when even if you understand what inflation is or what causes inflation, even if you don't understand what causes inflation, you have to acknowledge inflation is real and exists. and so to say that there is no tax on the middle class, it doesn't have to be a literal tax for it to be a tax, you complete doofus.
I would pose, so this gal, her name's JoJo from Jers. She's got like 500,000 Twitter followers. She's not verified, but I feel like we can out her because she's kind of a big presence on there. But I would tell Joe, I'd be like, hey, the very same people that believe the Patriot Act is about patriots and keeping America free, and all these different
the
bills.
Inflation Reduction Act.
The Inflation Reduction. Yeah. You actually believe the Inflation Reduction Act is about reducing inflation. I saw someone post it. I was trying to find it for this, but someone basically made a joke about the Inflation Reduction Act. They're like, hey, they're gonna pass, some bill that's called, End World Hunger Bill, and it's going to be about something totally unrelated to world hunger. And lo and behold, it was like yesterday or the day before, they've introduced a bill that's like, it's like End Hunger in Europe or something like that.
Stop it.
I'm not joking, man. End hunger in Europe by giving $4.5 billion to Ukraine to fight Russia, because and through their mental gymnastics, it's like, oh well, Ukraine is the breadbasket of Europe, so we need to keep Ukraine free. So by giving them this money that they don't want, none of the senators or Congress people want us to audit to see where it goes. By giving them this money, magically we're going to solve the hunger in Europe. So, I mean, I feel like it should be a pretty commonly accepted premise that the name of the bill is hardly ever what the bill actually does. And most of the time, it's totally unrelated or it's a complete opposite of what it does. Yeah, the Inflation Reduction Act, it's almost like we're living in a movie or something, or comedy, where it's like, I am going to reduce inflation with the Inflation Reduction Act by doing the exact same thing that led to inflation in the first place. Like, that's literally what it is. Let's print $700 billion to do this. $700 billion, I don't think people because we had a $6 trillion bill, a couple years ago or 2 years ago, people don't realize that's a lot of money. $600 billion. It's like, no, $600 billion is almost as much money as the bailouts were in 2008, which up until that point was the biggest amount of spending that we've ever spent ever. And $800 billion, think about how much money that is, and think about how it's like, wow, we flooded the market with that, and yet somehow I don't feel any richer. Isn't that money supposed to get into my hands at some point? If we increased the money supply, we tripled it, right? If we tripled the money supply over the past 20 years, why do I feel like I don't have triple the amount of money, right? If this is supposed to be so equitably distributed amongst everyone, it's fine. I could get it. Maybe there's some people that are millionaires and stuff, but, shouldn't I be making triple what I was making, a couple years ago or whatever? It doesn't work out that way. It's because all this money is just a nice excuse to take, those 87,000 IRS agents that they've hired to take your money. They want to make sure you're giving your money to them so they can go give it to their friends, which in turn give them kickbacks or hire them to be on the different boards, of all the different companies that they did favors for.
I think the other thing about this tweet, and I went on a rant about the term hoax from all these things, but these people can't answer back what the real harm of these individual things, or at least they can't have a serious conversation about these individual things that they claim, we're calling hoaxes or denying it. Because I'm thinking about the January 6th thing, right? And people are so worked up about this quote unquote insurrection. They're so worked up about this threat to democracy. And I just, what was the danger there? I genuinely don't know. All they hear is people are being put on, are put away for it. They're being tried and arrested in this sort of, clown court. And they're like, that's justification for me. And it's like, well, the government said that COVID is deadly and I should put on a mask. So that's justification for me. And, oh, well, they assured me that, paying the government $1 billion will fix climate change. And even though these polar ice caps were supposed to be gone by the year 2020, it's been a hotter summer. So that's good enough for me. All these things that this person just sort of blankets with the hoax. On the flip side, they just buy the narrative. So you're no better than someone who says, oh, that's a hoax because I read it from Stormfront. You're no better. You're just, oh, I know it's real because I read it from CNN. Well, we'll have a dialogue about it. And they can't. They can't tell you what the actual crime of January 6th was, other than, at worst, property destruction and incidental manslaughter.
Someone on the wrong side got shot by a cop. That was the only death that happened as a direct result of the protest.
And that's not the crime they cite. They're not citing it as a violent mob. They're citing it as a threat to democracy. And after all the hearings that happened, Liz Cheney grandstanding, no one can come away from that with a concise argument and tell me what was under threat and what the actual problem was. Was there any real conspiracy that this was coordinated and that there was going to be an actual overthrow of the electoral vote results? No one can tell me that. And so, yeah, you're just buying you're calling the opposite perspectives you don't like a hoax, but you're kind of buying the inverse of the hoax, which is just the blind acceptance of truth. So I find that those dismissals for, I get that she's using this as a contrast point for the setup of sort of the punchline joke about the middle class tax being real. I get that, but it's just such partisan hackery to blindly buy all these things, just without question, without being able to articulate it, and then to say there is no tax cut. On the other hand, as well, just blindly unable to articulate what inflation, the effect of inflation, blindly unable to articulate what the threat of January 6th is, blindly unable to articulate why government action and climate change will help and is the only way to help and is worth the outcome costs. And you can't even acknowledge that there are outcome trade-offs, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, and we'll move to our last cringe post for the episode. And this one is a series of tweets, and so it starts off with this. All of my GOP friends who are worried about 87,000 IRS enforcement agents coming after the little guy, how about you just don't cheat on tax returns? A fully truthful and accurate tax return is bulletproof in an audit. I never understood the fear of an IRS audit. Don't lie. Period. I get that it's a headache to go through an audit. Nobody wants to do that. And I get that it's costly to go through an audit, and nobody ever wins when an audit comes knocking. But enforcement is important. Catching the cheats lowers the liability the rest of us need to pick up. In this budget, the IRS should have a built-in pay-for program for tax pros who represent audits for tax returns under X dollars in AGI. May as well be the $400K threshold. If the IRS audits a tax return under that mark, the government pays X to the tax pro if there's no change. Of course, if the audit isn't clean, the government doesn't pay, and the one who being audited is SOL to pay the tax pro their fees. But all y'all's W-2 only folks worrying about audits are worried about nothing. Hashtag tax Twitter. This is the most bend over for the establishment kind of reasoning ever. Talk about
he was definitely a hallway monitor in public school. He definitely was.
Absolutely. This is the if you have nothing to hide, then you have nothing to fear kind of person. So I'm sure that he will have absolutely no problem with me going through all of his personal private messages on his phone and going through his household belongings and just making sure everything's up to code, up to legal, making sure he's not said anything wrong or dismissive of the government, because he has nothing to fear. He has not, or nothing to hide. He has nothing to fear. That's the justification of this entire thread, is to say, yeah, it's a pain. Yeah, maybe it's an undue burden on you. Yeah, I know it's costly. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't complain if you're got something to hide. And that's not to account for the fact that people make mistakes, honest mistakes, because it's so freaking complicated and ridiculous. Like even being married, like figuring out the new system for W-2s, like we had to read it over multiple times. We had to make adjustments because it was so unclear about how much withholding we're supposed to have. And it's like, for really, my wife and I are pretty straightforward when it comes to tax. Like we don't have any crazy holdings or anything that would get taxed in a weird way or make us an anomaly. We're pretty straightforward as much as it gets. And even that was a complicated mess to figure out. So I can only imagine people who aren't as well versed in tax and finance and generally speaking, let alone people who have more complicated situations. It is a headache. And audits happening to these people can be devastating. And you saying that, well, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, that doesn't fix that. That's a right that's being infringed on that person that they should never have to deal with in the first place.
It's not, oh my gosh, this one, the more I think about it, the worse it gets and the more angry it makes me. It's not true that if you do your tax return right, that you're not going to get audited. Like you get audited for any reason. Like the guy ate a burrito that morning and he just doesn't feel good and wants to stick it to you, even though he's never met you. They do that. And like he was saying, nobody wins when there's an audit. The IRS agent doesn't win. The person being audited certainly doesn't win, and the taxpayer doesn't win. I brought this scenario up before, but I have someone close to my family that works in contracting. Had like a $700 discrepancy on their tax return. Basically, it was enough to have them sick this full-time IRS agent on them, cost $75,000 a year in salary, probably $100,000 with benefits and pensions and all that stuff, to the taxpayer over this $700 discrepancy. It's like, man, like if I was looking at the actual sustainability of this program about like, let's just even say that like this is a service that's valuable and like you can measure it in some way, which is like, well, the IRS is doing their job if they're bringing in more money than that's going out. It's like, well, by that definition, you should probably ignore every single tax violation under a certain amount of dollars because it's just not going to be in your return, especially with all the red tape and legal stuff that goes on where you can't actually effectively do your job as an IRS agent, even if you were trying to find someone that was, if we're granting the premise that taxes are good, we're not. That just shows how ineffectual these people actually are at doing their jobs. It's like you fail upwards. The worse you do, the more money you make, which is just kind of wild. The other side of it that drives me nuts is his last sentence, which is, if you're a W-2 employee, you don't need to worry about an audit. You're going to be fine. It's like, one, that's not true. But then two, it's like, so what are you saying? Are you saying like, hey, implicit in that is be a drone. Go be a W-2 employee. Go work somewhere, and be, fit into the grid of the government. Don't try and generate any other value outside of yourself, any new value. If you don't do that, you'll be fine. Because the people that actually generate value, the people that own businesses, the people that are actually trying to voluntarily trade and exchange services and goods, those people don't fit on a W-2. And so what he's saying is like, hey, entrepreneurs, I hate you. I don't like you. I don't want you to be around. And yeah, you should have a hell of a time when taxes come around. And that's what I want. My wife and I, we have a lot of different streams of income. It is a pain every single year to do our taxes. The amount of burden and hours and stress and resources that get tied up in having to comply is disproportional to the amount of value that we create for other people. We have different ways of housing people. We've got our own separate types of businesses. We're also W-2 employees. So we have all that stuff going on. It's all mixed together. And it's like, man, you would think, and this really illustrates, like, Scott Horton has the analogy of like the income tax is just a penalty for being productive. It's punishing you for doing a good job. And that is so obvious when it is when you're no one likes taxes, but when the easiest way to be taxed is when you're a W-2 employee and you don't have to be productive necessarily, or you're not as it's not as implicit that you are a productive member. There are plenty of W-2 people that are very, very productive, but to be someone that it kind of doesn't fit that mold means that you actually have to generate value to survive, to actually make money. And so, yeah, just their disdain. I don't know who this guy is or what he does. I'm assuming he's probably someone that would be, the tattletale and the hall monitor in school. But it's like this guy probably hasn't generated value in any other way in his life, because you'd realize it's like, well, in order for you to not be a W-2 employee, it means that you are generating value, and the only reason you have income is because you've done a really good job. And he wants to penalize you for that, or he wants to rat you out if you're not doing a good job of, reporting your earnings to the state. Oh, yeah.
The last thing I want to point out on this is his whole scheme about having it so that if, someone is audited under 400K and the government pays for it unless they're found wrong. It's so funny to me because he's like, the government will pay for it. Oh, well, where does the government get the money? Well, they get it from your taxes that you're paying to be audited about. It's such a backward circle. It's that illustration he used earlier, where you're just expanding the boat with holes in it and hiring more people to patch it, and which weighs it down and causes new tears. It's like you're paying for the service to, that won't cost you money when they incorrectly audit you because they're being paid by the government, which is being funded by your taxes that you're being audited. It's just this circle. Yeah, it's exactly right. And to think that the other aspect I wanted to mention is that to think that the IRS is not political is just stupid. Like all my GOP friends who are worried about the 87,000 IRS enforcement agents coming after the little guy. How about you just don't cheat? It's like, or how about like maybe remembering past the last 2 years when the IRS was found guilty of specifically denying nonprofit status to conservative and Christian organizations. That was a political thing from a apolitical institution, quote unquote. And this is the problem with the Republicans who think that there can be apolitical branches of the government, just small enough government that it just does things neutrally. That doesn't exist. Also wrong with the post libertarian crowds who think that you can position it rightly because there is no right direction to position that kind of thing. But then also dumb on the left, like this idiot who thinks the only reason why a GOP person would be worried is because they're cheating on their taxes. No, it's because the IRS is a political weapon. Just like the FBI and the CIA, it always gets used both by Republicans and Democrats to punish people they don't like and don't agree with. So of course, hiring more arms for this wing of political power is going to be targeted. And guess who more often than not gets screwed over by
the last thing I'll say on it, I want to kind of go over the
or is it liberals? Oh, wait a minute. It's neither. It's the small
his
people.
Nice, cool,
it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal.
And it's just so indicative,
usually people
right?
who are just trying to mind their own business and live their lives.
This system that can't actually be
doesn't matter.
Equally applied to everyone or fairly applied to everyone.
To live their own
and
lives.
Oh my gosh, who would have thought? Like, there's problems with it. Let's do this other weird niche. Solution for this to cover these edge cases, and then suddenly you realize, this is why taxes take so long to fill out and do. It's because we got to accommodate every single little thing. It's like, how about you just do away with all of it, right? Or at worst, just say, hey, this is how much money I made, and I paid 10%, and that's it. Just flat tax it, like for the folks that can stand having taxes and government taking your money. There's no need. It's like, this whole system is so complicated. We need to hire 87,000 more people, and it's created problems, and now we need another complicated, weird solution for it. I mean, that's the tax system in a nutshell.
Absolutely right. Well, unless there were any last follow-up comments you had, I think we're good to close the episode. So, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it. Make sure to share with your friends and to like and comment. All that good stuff helps us out. We'll see you on the next one.